Hello and welcome to Bytes, the paediatric podcast aimed at paediatric trainees or anyone interested in child health. I'm Asim, one of the paediatric trainees here in Wales and one of the presenters for Bytes. This is the first week that a whole bunch of new trainees have started working in paediatrics, and we're really happy to have you with us. We thought it would be very useful to get out some advice on how to use the Royal College's eportfolio system, Kaizen. This week, Stacey Harris, one of the presenters of Bytes, is joined by Laura Kelly, Regional Trainee Representative for West Midlands, who, after starting a number of ePortfolio supportive measures locally, has been dubbed by her colleagues in the West Midlands as the Kaizen Queen. She's going to guide us through getting the most out of our ePortfolio and how to use it to make it clear to the ARCP panels just how fantastic you are. Now, this recording was quite a long chat, so we split it into two halves. This is the first half this week, and we'll release the second half for you later. So, if you're new to Kaizen or just looking for some helpful tips and tricks, Laura has the answers for you. Let's get started.
There we are. Okay. Hi, I'm joined by Laura Kelly today, and she's kindly agreed to talk to us a little bit about Kaizen. Um, Laura, I was wondering if you might be able to tell us a little bit about yourself.
Of course. So my name's Laura Kelly, and I'm a paediatric registrar in the West Midlands. I'm shortly returning to training after a year out of programme. I've been working as a clinical fellow for Health Education England in the West Midlands as part of their professional support and wellbeing team. So I'll be going back in September as an ST5 working in general paediatrics.
Oh, brilliant. It's so nice getting to know each other. And I didn't realise that about you, Laura. So I understand that you've become a little bit of a master of the ePortfolio. How did that happen?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't quite say I'm a master of the portfolio, although my colleagues do like to tease me that I am the Kaizen Queen, and that's Queen spelled Kween, because we do like our Kaizen alliteration. Um, However, I suppose I probably do have more of an interest than most in ePortfolio. I've been the RCPCH trainee representative for the West Midlands for the last 3 years, and so a big part of that role is representing trainees' views around ePortfolio, and it's something that if you were a fly on the wall in our sort of committee meetings, you'd know it's something I'm very sort of vocal about. I think, what with the progress curriculum coming in, there's been lots of sort of change and sort of things to kind of work around. So I've done a lot of work with the college team most recently, sort of around things like how different trainee levels access the curriculum. I'm currently helping to kind of rewrite and restructure the illustrations because we've got the new shape of training program coming in. So there's lots of things going on in the committee, and we do have like an ePortfolio rep, the wonderful Emma Dyer, who's joined us quite recently and leads on a lot of that work, but all the trainee representatives kind of will sort of say that ePortfolio and queries around ePortfolio is a big part of kind of what they do. So that's kind of one aspect to why I'm interested in ePortfolio. I guess the other aspect has been sort of within kind of our patch of like the West Midlands. I think in our kind of like local trainees committee, we've become sort of more aware of perhaps the challenges that ePortfolio poses to anyone that's new to paediatrics, but particularly to those who are sort of new to the UK, new to the NHS, who maybe never had to use an ePortfolio sort of in the way that we use it before. And during my kind of out of programme year, I've done a lot of work looking at how we support international medical graduates across all specialties in the West Midlands. But obviously, paediatrics is where my heart lies, and I'm very aware that like in the West Midlands, nearly sort of 1 in 4 of our trainees would have qualified overseas. So I think ensuring that all trainees know how their ePortfolio works is super important, and that's kind of where I've got a bit of a passion about it. but I think it's really important for those people for whom it may not just be a new type of eportfolio, but like using eportfolio could be just a completely new thing, and you've got to kind of hit the ground running. So I guess not really a master of the eportfolio, but definitely someone that's quite passionate because it's so important to our training. And I guess, the nerd in me likes to think that having an interest in eportfolio is like being a spy. Everyone knows when it doesn't go right and the spies haven't done their jobs and a huge catastrophe happens, and no one knows when the spies are behind the scenes, it's all going smoothly. And I kind of wanted to be a spy when I was younger, so I guess this is me kind of living the dream.
That's amazing. I love your name, Kaizen Queen. That's so going on Twitter later. Brilliant. That's so lovely to hear how passionate you are, and you've inspired me a little bit because that's something that Atom and I have been thinking about, how to support trainees that have come from abroad and off, and the system is very new to them. And I think, this is often one of the things, isn't it? And this is why we were wanting to do the Reflections podcast, as as kind of trying to help people, because it does take a lot. I still feel like quite not that great at eportfolio, and I've been doing it for years now, and I don't know, I think some people take to it, some people, like, I've always not particularly found it particularly easy to use to my benefit, I think. But yeah, that's great to hear. So I've heard that you run a Kaizen cafe. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about what it is.
Absolutely. So, Kaizen Cafe, again, cafe spelled with a K. That's one problem with this podcast. You can't see the wonderful alliterations that I create.
They're amazing alliterations.
So, Kaizen Cafe kind of evolved from something that I had done as part of the have this sort of trainee-led induction to paediatric training in the West Midlands called Welcome to Paediatrics. And that's going to be going into its third year this year. And sort of from the sort of very first one, kind of the trainee leading on the event was like, will you, in your sort of RCPCH rep role, come and give us a talk about Kaizen, eportfolio, ARCPs, to all the new kind of ST1s. And I was like, absolutely, of course, this is sort of something I'm interested in, I'll come and talk about this. And I think, when you're doing a trainee induction and you're up against, people doing icebreakers, talking about exciting opportunities, talking about Kaizen and ARCPs was kind of, I guess, the shipping forecast of trainee induction topics. So, I didn't have high hopes that this was going to be sort of high on people's sort of agenda, but actually, maybe it's my slightly over-the-top obsession with things and alliteration, and I managed to get these new ST1s kind of laughing and asking lots of questions about Kaizen, and I thought maybe actually creating this relaxed environment where people sort of feel it's okay to kind of ask what they might think is a silly question. Maybe actually this is what's really needed, because lots of people commented that it was a really useful part of the sort of induction for them. So I'd had this kind of idea germinating, and then at the start of this year I thought, right, now's the time, let's sort of create some kind of meeting session where people can come along, find out a little bit about what they should be doing with their eportfolio, how they should be preparing for ARCPs, and kind of have a sort of Q&A discussion sort of thing. And that was how kind of Kaizen Cafe was born. Now, originally it was planned as kind of in-person sessions, and then COVID came along and cut short my planned run of events. But we were able to hold the first one, and I was really sort of surprised. I'd sort of specifically asked for a very small room because I was like, not many people will come, I'm sure, and it was full, it was packed. And it was one of those things I ended up running over about like sort of an hour with this queue of trainees at the end, just still with more questions to ask. And I thought there's clearly an appetite here for people wanting to kind of have a safe space to sort of ask what they should be doing. And I've even used like an online booking system so trainees could ask questions when they booked. So then I could kind of make sure that those were answered even if they didn't want to sort of ask them in front of the room. And so it got really great feedback. And so during COVID, I've sort of tried to kind of keep on with things, but obviously I can't do things in the face-to-face, which, reduces the amount of cake, but I encourage people to eat cake at the Kaizen Cafe, wherever they may be. And so I've done like a COVID edition of Kaizen Cafe, and we've got a virtual transition to Registrar Day, and I'm going to do a Kaizen Cafe about sort of specific Kaizen considerations when you're becoming a registrar.
If that's right with the K as well, yeah.
And then sort of writing about Kaizen Cafe in the Milestones magazine, and here doing this podcast. And then the plan is that sort of HE in our region are setting up kind of like a HE sort of Zoom account sort of thing. And then hopefully in the autumn I can kind of restart Kaizen Cafe in sort of virtual format. And if anything, that's going to, I think, really help, because actually anyone can come along. You can use lots of like anonymous Q&A apps. So actually, I think it's only going to get bigger and better. So that was kind of how it all happened and evolved.
Laura, it's an absolutely fantastic idea, and it's lovely to hear how your little idea is growing and growing and growing. I love that sort of thing. So what do you actually do in the sessions? What do you go through?
So how I kind of planned it out. So and I think having done that first one and done some few things, it's sort of helped me kind of finesse the sort of the plan of how it will work. So how I initially started it, it's kind of had like 15 to 20 minutes of almost like an intro, like so that essentially everyone who was there, whether they were sort of fairly new ST1, or we even had like ST7s, ST8s there. They kind of have like a base like level of like what is progress, what should you be tagging to, how does Kaizen work, how do you find out what you need to be completing on the eportfolio, and then how do you sort of prepare for your ARCP. So kind of, and a little bit about like useful resources. So it's like 15 to 20 minutes of almost just like signposting, not necessarily going through in depth, and then kind of opening up for sort of questions. And I liked that in the room, because actually it became less about me answering all the questions, and actually because you had a mix of sort of more junior trainees, more senior trainees, a lot of the senior trainees were chipping in and going, oh yeah, actually, Laura's right, it is that, I've done this and that worked for me. Or you'd have someone be like, oh yeah, that's a really good question actually, I used to think this, but then I found out this. And so it's almost in a way you're not just using what I know, but also getting people kind of learning off each other as well, about how they, sort of hints, tips, tricks on how to kind of make the most out of Kaizen. So that was, I think, the idea for me, is that it wasn't just one person, like me giving a lecture, but more of a kind of crowdsourced support. And also so people didn't feel alone, like they were asking this question, and actually other people say, oh my gosh, thank you for asking that question, I'm the exact same.
Yeah, that sounds great. Because of course, people are going to have found different ways to do different things, aren't they? And and I bet you've learnt loads just from hearing what other people do as well. I really want to be part of it. I want to come to one of these Kaizen cafes. I need all the help I can get. So I was wondering, in the Kaizen cafe, what do you usually get asked most about? What's a popular topic?
So thinking not just about sort of Kaizen Cafe, but also thinking about in the West Midlands we have like a trainee committee sort of email, and so trainees, we've always encouraged them since we set up our committee about sort of 3 years ago to email us with queries, and so we can kind of find out. So that probably is also another way that Kaizen Cafe evolved. And there always seems to be three sort of key categories that people ask questions about, and first one, classic one, is what do I need to do to pass my ARCP? And I think we've all asked that question at some point. Then the second thing that people often ask about, and I think partly because things have changed and it isn't always as clear as it could be, is what am I meant to tag to? And then the third question, which has been a lot of recently, because of Kaizen having a little bit of a blip at the weekend, is something along the lines of, this thing on Kaizen isn't working when I click on it. Fix it, please.
Oh goodness, yeah. So yeah, that'd be great. If we could go through those a little bit later, if that's okay. Just a couple of top tips about ARCP. So yeah, you mentioned about the blip on the weekend. I didn't use Kaizen on the weekend. And I think obviously people have different opinions about Kaizen, and I think it has its benefits and its disadvantages and things. But what do you think about Kaizen?
That's the $1 million question right there. I mean, I think we have to be, I feel a bit of a politician in the answer I'm going to give. So I think when you talk about Kaizen, there's kind of two things to consider. One is the actual software Kaizen that sort of powers the site that we log on to, and kind of is all the sort of computer programming in the background. So when you press a button, this happens, and so on and so forth. And then the kind of other aspect of what we call Kaizen is sort of the eportfolio content on Kaizen that's generated by the Royal College. So I think I will freely admit, as we've said, we're recording this podcast only 2 days after Kaizen sort of had a glitch, the logon system failed, and on Sunday no one could log on to Kaizen. So I'm not here saying that the software is perfect, because it isn't. However, what I will say is that a lot of the kind of eportfolio content, like the assessments, the curriculum, and sort of the content in the forms on Kaizen is good, and the RCPCH team who kind of generate the portfolio content, ever since sort of the progress curriculum has been introduced, they've been really open to suggestions about change. And when something, we get feedback like this doesn't make sense or can this be clearer, they're really open to kind of listening to us and will sort of rapidly make changes. So Kaizen isn't a perfect software by no means, but equally looking at some of the requests I fill out on other eportfolios for trainees, I don't think there is a perfect eportfolio software yet, and I think Kaizen's definitely got some more kind of modern feel than a lot of eportfolio software. But I do think a lot of the content on Kaizen is good, and I think if there's ever anything in a form or wording that you think is not very good, then the training services team, the eportfolio team at the Royal College, are really good at kind of responding to feedback and taking things on board, and kind of continually improving the content of forms, which is a bit cliche because of course Kaizen is Japanese for continuous improvement, so there we go.
Oh, amazing. This was just something that I was just thinking about at the time. So what is the best way to sort of put forward suggestions and things for things that don't quite make sense to you or that you think could be different, and how, what's the sort of process for that?
So absolutely, so there's a eportfolio team at the RCPCH, and you can email them. Also, often a lot of people that work in eportfolio also work in the training services team, so whether you email, I think it's eportfolio@rcpch.ac.uk, or whether it's training.services@rcpch.ac.uk, they will kind of sort of answer your query. So if it's something about actually, I can't find my level 2 progress curriculum, or in this, when I've opened up the ACAT form, I don't understand the wording of this particular thing. That's the sort of thing that they can kind of actually actively change or sort of explain why it is how it is. On Kaizen itself, you'll see at the bottom there's like sort of Kaizen HQ, and there's like a help me button, and that's goes back to like the software developers, so you can sort of fill out things there. If it's something more about like the software, like a doesn't work, or it sort of there's a problem with page loading or something like that. So those are kind of the two different sort of types of issue and how you could kind of feedback about them.
Yeah, so that's the thing. Maybe we should be, as trainees, like a little bit more responsive and not just kind of floundering around, not not quite getting things. Maybe I there's loads of things perhaps I should have just sort of put forward, but I don't think I really realised that that was something that I could do. I don't know.
Well, maybe that's one of the good things that will come out of this podcast. Obviously, this podcast will generate many good things, but actually, I would say to any trainee that's using Kaizen, if there's something that's really causing you hassle, that really kind of spoils the experience for you, then do let kind of the training services or eportfolio team at the Royal College know, because they do have the ability to change a lot of things themselves. And if it's something software related that they need to go back to the software developers about, they're in regular communication with them. So I think if there is something that's driving you absolutely, mad about how it works, absolutely, I would say to any trainee that let them know. You can also always let your training rep, because every year you have a training rep, you can always let us know, and we're in regular communication. So just let someone know, and we'll try and fix it if we can possibly fix it.
Yeah, maybe we could put the email address like on the website or something as well,
Absolutely.
and publicize that a little bit. That would be good, I
Yeah.
think. So you mentioned about tagging to the progress curriculum. How do you do it? What is the best way to do it?
That's a really good question, because I think it's probably been a bit of an evolution, and I think when progress came in, probably lots of people were doing tagging and thinking they were doing it in the right way, and then it transpires that everyone was doing it slightly differently. So this has kind of been an area of renewed focus this year, so that kind of regional variation can be removed, and everyone's kind of doing the same thing, so it's sort of fair and right. So I think my key message about tagging is the things that you need to be focusing on tagging to are the key capabilities. So tagging the key capabilities for your level, that's what it's all about. So you don't need to tag against domains, you don't need to tag against learning outcomes, and you definitely do not need to tag illustrations. In fact, very recently the ability to tag illustrations has been removed, so hopefully sort of that's kind of a query that won't kind of rear its head again. When you're looking at your progress curriculum, drop down to the key capabilities, and it's the key capabilities that you want to be tagging against. Now, it doesn't mean that if you say completed an entry that just simply does not correlate to any of the key capabilities, that you can't then tag to the sort of the learning outcome above that key capability. But the thing that sort of will be kind of looked at to sort of judge whether you're achieving against the curriculum will be the key capabilities. So they're the kind of things to really focus on, kind of demonstrating that you're achieving. And I think it's kind of important to note that when you're sort of completing a log or an assessment, you should really only be tagging to key capabilities from within a maximum of 2 domains, and that's where the sort of wording about justifications for tagging to more than 2 domains comes in. So clearly there are going to be some events that a trainee sort of wants to reflect on or do a log about or an assessment that are going to be so huge that it's perfectly reasonable to put justification why you need to sort of tag to key capabilities across more than 2 domains. But in general, you should be trying to sort of stick to key capabilities within sort of 2 domains. And I think perhaps part of the sort of issue around kind of tagging to the progress curriculum is, I think prior to progress curriculum, what different regions were doing was very different. So we had this curriculum prior to Progress where you had sort of over 2,000 curriculum points to kind of get tagged through training. Some regions there wasn't really any expectation that you would be tagging to those. In other regions the expectation was that you tagged every single one of those 2,000 curriculum points over your 8 years. And so I think a lot of different regions in different ways are probably having a culture shift from either not really having to tag and now having to tag things, or they've gone from having to almost kind of continually churn through the tags so you get your 2,000 tags sort of done in your 8 years to, oh, actually, there's now only 33 learning outcomes in 8 years and each has only got, a handful of key capabilities within them. So I think the kind of focus with Progress is meant to be on kind of really choosing the one or two most relevant aspects of the curriculum and kind of tagging those key capabilities to your sort of log or assessment. And so I think whatever your previous experience was, would probably feel quite different from what was happening before. But yeah, key message is tag to the key capabilities and don't worry about the rest of it.
Okay, amazing. So yeah, that clarified quite a lot of things for me actually, because and it's quite interesting to hear that there was such a difference, and of course, people are going to be adjusting depending on what the sort of culture was, I suppose, in their region. So one of the things that obviously I'm getting to know the key illustrations now, as it's one of the first times that I've done it. And sometimes you kind of do something and then you go to the key capability, and it doesn't quite cover it. And I kind of thought that maybe it could be that you sort of think about the key capabilities before you do an assessment to try and make it a little bit more efficient, so that you're sort of aiming your assessments towards the key capabilities. What do you think about that?
You've literally hit the nail on the head. I think now that we have the Progress curriculum with a very kind of targeted set of key capabilities, in a way I think we need to, rather than logging something you did and then with the previous curriculum looking to see which of the 2,000 points matches it, we absolutely, you're right, need to do it the other way around now and have a look at the key capabilities and go, okay, what have I not demonstrated? How am I going to demonstrate it? And then kind of create either an assessment, a development log, a reflection to show that you're demonstrating that key capability. So I think really that you're absolutely right. It's sort of starting with the curriculum now and kind of targeting your learning or sort of what you undertake to show that you're meeting those key capabilities, rather than trying to kind of shoehorn something awkwardly into, well, I think that kind of fits, if you see what I mean. So I think you're completely right.
Yeah, that's kind of what my head is coming round to, is like, this doesn't quite work how I used to do it. I need to change my way of thinking about doing ePortfolio. So I suppose that's one way of making it a little bit more efficient, is just being much more targeted with your assessments that you put on there, and thinking about it a little bit before you do them. Do you have any other sort of tips about covering the curriculum in an efficient way?
So I think using the sort of curriculum sort of report tool on Kaizen, so when you drop down on your menu and you'll see like timeline and sort of meetings, you'll see something that says reports, and you can go curriculum and go in that way, or via your dashboard you can see the different domains and click view and go in, and then you can see what you've already kind of tagged to, what you've already completed, so then you can kind of work out, okay, which things have I not tagged to and not met. Okay, then I can see that particular key capability under that level 2 learning outcome is what I need to be focusing on. So I think having a look at that every now and then when you're on Kaizen is good, just to kind of jog in your mind when you're then back on, the ward or in clinic. That's something that I need to just be on the lookout for. And I think also sometimes I meet trainees that sort of think that perhaps there's the only way to achieve a key capability is to do an assessment that links to that key capability, whereas actually you've got a huge range of the development logs you can complete on Kaizen. And so actually sometimes a development log will kind of maybe completing a clinical question about an area or a reflection or logging some sort of learning you've done in a particular area will actually meet that key capability. And so it becomes less about sort of trying to find an assessment that matches that key capability. Obviously assessments have their role, but I think you can use the development logs, and obviously then you've got a lot more autonomy on what that development log is.
Yeah, that's I don't really use those features very much, and maybe this is why I'm struggling.
And I just wanted to say thank you to Stacey and Laura for recording that podcast for us. Like I said, we're going to have the rest of that released for you later on. That's all we have for this week. Thank you for listening to Dragon Bytes.